The night of March 24, 1944, was not just cold. It was a deep, penetrating chill at 18,000 feet over the blacked-out heart of Nazi Germany. Inside the roaring metal frame of a Royal Air Force Lancaster bomber, 21-year-old Sergeant Nicholas Alkemade was a man already living on borrowed time. His world was a small, cramped perspex turret at the very tail of the aircraft, a position chosen for its strategic field of fire but one that now felt like a death trap. The mission was a familiar one, yet fraught with ever-present danger: a massive bombing raid on Berlin. The city was the most heavily defended target in the Reich, a nest of anti-aircraft guns and prowling night fighters. The crew was tense, every man acutely aware that each passing second brought them closer to the storm of flak and fire that awaited them. But the storm found them early. Before the sprawling cityscape of Berlin could even appear on the horizon, their Lancaster was suddenly, violently illuminated. The searchlights, or master searchlight as crews called it, had them locked in its blinding cone. In an instant, the dark sky became a stage for their demise. The German night fighter that had been stalking them swooped in, its cannons blazing. For Nicholas, isolated in the tail, the attack was a deafening cacophony of ripping metal and exploding shells. He felt the aircraft lurch violently as cannon rounds tore into the fuselage and wings, and the most terrifying sight of all began to unfold. A river of fire, fed by ruptured fuel tanks, started to engulf the aircraft, creeping its way toward his isolated position. The reality of their situation was absolute and horrifying. They were not just damaged. They were dying, transforming into a falling coffin of fire in the frozen night sky. The attack erupted with a sudden, violent finality that left no room for reaction, only terror. The German Junkers Ju-88, a shadowy predator that had slipped unseen into the bomber stream, delivered its lethal strike with devastating efficiency. For the crew of the Lancaster, the first warning was the shuddering impact of 20mm cannon shells ripping through the thin aluminum skin of their aircraft. The sound was not a mere noise but a physical force, a deafening concussive blast of tearing metal and exploding incendiary rounds. For Nicholas Alkemade, hunched in the tail turret, his world instantly transformed into a maelstrom of fire and shrapnel. The shells walked their way along the fuselage, and with a horrific, gut-wrenching certainty, he felt his turret jam, trapping him in a transparent cage at the very end of a dying beast. The familiar roar of the wind was replaced by the shriek of disintegrating structure, and the steady hum of the engines was drowned out by the frantic, then silent intercom. Isolation became his immediate and terrifying reality. The tail gunner's position, while offering an unparalleled field of fire, was a world away from the main crew compartment, connected only by a narrow crawlway. Now that narrow artery was severed. A wall of flame, fed by the ruptured fuel tanks in the wings, erupted amidships, creating an impassable inferno between him and his 6 crewmates. He was completely cut off. The fire, an angry, roaring entity of orange and red, began to consume the Lancaster from the inside out, licking its way toward him. The intense heat became unbearable, radiating through the perspex of his turret, threatening to melt his very sanctuary into a molten death trap. He could see nothing ahead but the fire, and the acrid smell of burning fuel, oil, and cordite filled his lungs, each breath a searing reminder of his impending cremation. The aircraft, its structural integrity failing, began a violent, uncontrolled spiral, pinning him with G-forces and turning the sky into a dizzying carousel of stars, flames, and black earth. In those final agonizing moments inside the turret, Nicholas Alkemade was confronted with a choice no human being should ever have to make. His training, his instinct for survival, all pointed to one inevitable action: the parachute. It was the fundamental last resort guarantee for every airman, the slender thread of hope when all else failed. As he struggled against the forces pinning him, his hand went to the clip of his parachute pack, stored beside him for easy access. What he saw there extinguished that final flicker of hope and replaced it with a cold, stark horror. The pack was ablaze, the canvas smoldering and the delicate rigging of the silk canopy within already consumed by the intense heat. It was not just damaged. It was a mass of flames, an utterly useless lump of fire. The reality was absolute. There would be no gentle descent beneath a billowing white canopy. There would be no survival. This realization, instead of plunging him into panic, delivered a strange, chilling clarity. The calculus of his death was now brutally simple. He had two paths and only two. To remain was to die a slow, agonizing death, being roasted alive in his turret as the Lancaster plunged earthward, or to be torn apart in the final disintegration of the aircraft upon impact. The flames were already searing his skin and lungs. The alternative was to jump. To leap from the stricken plane was to choose a quicker, cleaner end. The 3-mile fall through the frozen night air would grant him a few minutes of consciousness at most before the final, mercifully swift impact. It was not a choice between life and death, but between two forms of death. In that moment, he made his decision. He would choose the void. He would take control of his final moments and choose the method of his own demise. As he later recounted, the thought was straightforward and grimly rational. It was a horrible sight. I knew it was either burn or jump. I decided to jump. It was the easier way to die. With that resolution, he manually rotated his jammed turret, wrestled open the escape hatch, and without a second thought, propelled himself out into the biting silent cold of the 18,000-foot night, a man falling freely, choosing the certainty of the long drop over the certainty of the fire. The transition from the roaring, fiery inferno of the aircraft to the silent, freezing embrace of the open sky was as instantaneous as it was profound. One moment, he was fighting the searing heat and the violent gyrations of the disintegrating Lancaster. The next, he was enveloped by an immense and absolute quiet, broken only by the distant, fading roar of the dying plane. The initial gut-wrenching plunge was quickly replaced by a sensation he never could have anticipated. Instead of the terrifying, stomach-lurching drop he had braced for, his body found its terminal velocity. The acceleration ceased, and he was no longer falling, but floating. The fierce wind became a steady, supportive cushion, and the world around him lost all points of reference. He was a mote of dust suspended in an infinite dark vault. Above him, the burning wreckage of his Lancaster, now just a single dimming star in a vast constellation, seemed to drift away from him, as if he were the one standing still and the universe was gently moving around him. The panic, the terror, the desperate struggle for survival, all of it melted away, replaced by an overwhelming and inexplicable sense of peace. This was not the hysterical calm of shock, but a deep, profound acceptance. His fate was sealed, the decision made. With the struggle over, a strange tranquility descended upon his mind. He was acutely aware of his circumstance, a man falling from an impossible height without a parachute, and yet he felt no fear of the end. His thoughts turned inward, becoming clear and almost detached. He later recalled noticing the beauty of the night, the crisp clarity of the stars in the black sky, far from the obscuring smoke and fires of the war below. He observed the serene, snow-covered landscape of Germany unfolding silently beneath him, a sight of breathtaking beauty that stood in stark contrast to the violent mission he had just been a part of. There was no pain, no cold, only a serene, weightless drifting. In those final moments, hurtling towards certain death, Nicholas Alkemade experienced a quietude more profound than any he had ever known on the ground. He had made his choice, and in accepting it completely, he had found a moment of perfect, untroubled stillness at the heart of his own catastrophe. This surreal, peaceful interlude could not last. The earth, which had for so long seemed a distant, abstract painting, began to assert its presence with growing urgency. The gentle, featureless patches of white and dark began to resolve into distinct, terrifying forms. The vague, dark smudges sharpened into the specific, unforgiving shapes of a dense pine forest. The sensation of floating vanished, replaced by the visceral, gut-level understanding of velocity. The ground was no longer below him. It was rushing up to meet him, a vast and solid wall accelerating with terrifying speed. The silent, star-dusted world erupted into a roaring torrent of wind as his mind, jolted from its peaceful reverie, registered the final, inescapable reality of the impact. There was no time for a final thought, no last-minute prayer or flash of his life. His consciousness was filled with one overwhelming sensory input: the dark spear points of the pine trees, magnifying with impossible speed, blotting out the stars, the sky, everything. Then an explosion of sensation, a symphony of splintering wood and a final catastrophic jolt that traveled through his entire being. And then nothing. A profound and absolute nothing. The universe did not go black. It simply ceased to be. Consciousness returned not as a sudden shock, but as a slow, painful dawn. The first sensation was a profound, all-encompassing cold that seeped into his very bones. Then came the pain, a sharp, screaming agony in his back and leg, a throbbing reminder of the burns on his face and hands. Nicholas Alkemade opened his eyes to a world of absolute stillness and darkness, his mind struggling to bridge the chasm between memory and reality. His last conscious thought was of the forest rushing up to meet him and the certainty of annihilation. Yet, here he was, lying on his back, looking up at a canopy of pine branches silhouetted against a pre-dawn sky. He was alive. The realization did not bring immediate joy, only a wave of profound, disbelieving confusion. He moved his fingers and toes, terrified of what he might find, and was met with a surge of pain but also the confirmation that his spine was intact. His limbs were functional. He had not simply survived. He had, against every law of nature, cheated a fate that had been sealed at 18,000 feet. The physics of his survival were as simple as they were miraculous. He had not struck the canopy of the pine forest with a single catastrophic impact. Instead, his body had been decelerated through a series of gradual energy-absorbing stages. The supple, snow-laden branches of the pine trees had acted like a vast natural net, each layer snapping and bending but also slowing his tremendous velocity. They stripped away his flying suit and battered his body, but they transformed his fall from an instantaneous stop into a brutal but survivable series of impulses. The final cushion was the deep snowdrift on the forest floor, which received his body after the branches had robbed it of its lethal speed. It was a perfect one-in-a-million combination of natural factors, a biological and environmental safety system that had intervened where his man-made parachute had failed. He was severely injured, yes, with a badly sprained knee and the lingering wounds from the fire, but he was, astonishingly, in one piece. His survival, however, immediately presented a new set of dangers. As daylight filtered through the trees, he was discovered not by rescuers, but by German civilians and subsequently handed over to the Gestapo. His captors were immediately suspicious. A lone Allied airman, found wandering in the vicinity of a crashed bomber, spinning a fantastical tale of jumping without a parachute? It was dismissed as a clumsy cover story, an attempt to conceal his true mission as a spy who had been landed by other means. They interrogated him rigorously, convinced his incredible account was a lie. To prove his story, Alkemade made a simple, audacious request. He asked them to find the wreckage of his Lancaster and look for the remains of his parachute. He told them exactly where it would be, in its storage bracket in the charred tail section. The German authorities, thorough and meticulous, took him at his word and launched an investigation. The search of the crash site yielded the definitive, irrefutable evidence. There, just as he had described, was the scorched and mangled frame of the tailgunner's turret, and within it, still fastened in its clips, was the steel harness of his parachute, its canvas pack and silk canopy completely burned away. The evidence was impossible to ignore. The Germans were not just convinced, they were awestruck. In a remarkable gesture of respect that transcended the bitterness of war, the local German commander formally documented Alkemade's fall and issued him an official certificate attesting to the facts of his miraculous survival. This document was not merely a piece of paper. It was a testament to a human story so extraordinary that it temporarily silenced the drumbeat of conflict, acknowledging a miracle that left both captor and captive equally humbled. Following his liberation at the war's end, Nicholas Alkemade returned to Britain not as a celebrated hero, but as a man profoundly grateful for the simple privilege of a future. He settled back into a quiet, unassuming life, taking a job in a chemical factory and building the peaceful existence that had been so nearly stolen from him in the fiery skies over Germany. He married, raised a family, and for decades performed the mundane, beautiful routines of a peacetime life. The man who had cheated death on such an epic scale never sought the spotlight, but his story, meticulously documented by both his own account and the official German certificate, refused to fade into obscurity. It became a cornerstone of wartime lore, a narrative so audacious in its defiance of physics and probability that it continues to be studied and recounted as one of the most compelling survival stories in all of human history. His post-war life was a second act granted by a miracle, and he lived it with the quiet appreciation of a man who had truly stared into the abyss and had been unexpectedly returned to the world. The enduring power of Alkemade's experience lies not merely in the statistical anomaly of his survival, but in the profound human journey it represents. It is a story that stretches from the depths of human despair, the agonizing choice between two horrific deaths, to the surreal tranquility of his fall, and finally, to the shocking return to life. It demonstrates a chilling clarity of mind in the face of absolute finality, and an almost preternatural peace found in the heart of catastrophe. His tale forces us to confront the razor-thin line between tragedy and miracle, and to acknowledge that within the cold, hard calculus of physics, there can sometimes be room for the inexplicable. Nicholas Alkemade's legacy is a permanent testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even when all hope is logically extinguished, the outcome is never certain until the very last moment. His life stands as an enduring beacon, proving that against impossible odds, and in the most unforeseen ways, miracles can and do happen, leaving an indelible mark on our understanding of survival, fate, and the incredible will to live.